what I love is like I always imagined some of the PT stuff was like recurring revenue model, almost like I thought that sometimes like the PTs like put you in this stuff so that like it's job security. And so what I think is interesting is that like all of a sudden you put him in this like, hey, use this model. We're going to do it this way. And now all of a sudden he like doesn't need to go to the PT. He can almost like, get strong on his own. He's changing the pattern. So what I find what's interesting with you guys is the idea, instead of being like, hey, I'm going to like continually to like rehab these guys and do all this stuff that they're going to have to come to me for this injury, which is, recurring revenue, job security. You guys are like, there's plenty of people that are fucked up. We don't have time to work with this. So now you can fix yourself. It
creates this like weird codependency relationship between the provider and the client too, where like you need each other to survive. Like but
you guys don't take that approach.
We don't take that approach. That's a standard PT approach.
I think that's why I like you guys, because honestly, like I've always said that chiros, and I've met some incredible chiros like Dr. Bueller, fucking Dr. Bob, who I go see, my buddy Tony Harp, who's a neurosity guy. Like and there's a couple other dudes that I've met that are like really good at what they do. But I think the reason I like you guys is because you're not stuck in this like, ice and stem, this, like, all the modalities. Where
that didn't work. Let's do it again.
Yeah, let's do it again. And now I got to teach you these corrective exercises. Oh, the corrective exercises aren't working. Now let me give you more corrective exercises or new ones in this. And there's like this never ending cycle, when really it just comes down to at least what I've always used in PT clinic, which is these people just look really weak, and they would probably fix a lot of this dysfunction if they were just stronger.
My breaking point, whenever I was in kind of a traditional clinical model, I always wanted to practice in the same way. And I want to treat other people the way that I would want to be treated. If it's something simplistic and you don't need me, why would I want to keep coming in here and keep doing this over and over and over?
Because you got bills to pay.
Well, yeah.
And mama needs some new shoes.
But I would not want to be treated that way. So I don't treat other people that way. But the breaking point to me was I had a dude who was a fairly high level CrossFit athlete. And he could pull about 650, so he could deadlift right around there. And he came in with this really horrible back pain. And the heaviest thing I had in the clinic was a 35-pound kettlebell. And I'm like, what am I supposed to do with this? And so like that was kind of a moment where I was like, all right, I'm done. That's it. And so whenever I created my model, my clinic, that was the first thing we did, is make sure we have heavyweight barbells and lots of options.
We're not just giving them stuff and say, hey, trust in me as your like dogmatic teacher. It is we are giving them education to help them understand more about what's going on inside their body, so that they can learn and triage and self-assess along the way. And in doing so, like, we talked about, we gave these guys a big pain lecture yesterday too, which I know Nick gets all excited about.
I know you're going to reference it, but I want to come back and actually talk a little bit more about that, about the pain lecture and the idea behind it and the pain neuromatrix and all that. I think it's fascinating.
Yeah. So through this education piece, what it does is it calms down the stress response. It calms down the fear. It calms down the anxiety inside the brain. And we know through research that actually does lower your pain sensitivity. It helps it decrease, right? And then when that lowers, we can then move better. And once again, it's that compounding effect that we're searching for.
That neuromatrix theory is really fascinating, and we truly can integrate all of that back into the idea behind what we're doing here with programs, right? So every input yields an output. And so that neuromatrix theory is biopsychosocial, biological tissues, what that signal goes to the brain, how it's prioritized, psychological. So what is my perceived or believed expectation for an input, and then socially, what is going on around me that is creating another input into that system. And so then it gets categorized into this hierarchy. The reality is, again, everything comes down to the nervous system. So how we integrate, how we change the body with pain response is simply by changing those stimuli going to the brain. Mm-hmm. So whether that's through, the education, understanding psychological issues, right? Psychological component to pain, and being able to provide some context to people, that oftentimes will start to decrease some of that pain response. There's a study done several years ago that showed prior to getting a hip replacement surgery, they took this group and split these people in half, and half the people went and had the surgery, then presented to a provider for rehab. The other half saw the provider before the surgery and were given pain science education. and they had a 65% reduction in overall perceived pain ratings following the surgery for those that had the education first. Understanding what it was, understanding what was going to happen, doesn't allow for your brain to create the narratives. And so therefore, it helps to decrease that threat level that is associated with pain. So, understanding that and changing those inputs. And then again, with the biological piece of it, when we add a barbell onto our back, we overload the system, overload the musculature. It's providing a new input into the brain that can then be categorized and prioritized.
What's interesting too is there's like a really interesting close relationship between pain and fear. Mm-hmm. And I sometimes think that like the fear of being injured, or maybe like the fear of this stuff, ends up compounding and creating this like increased pain. And then 100%. Pain is such an interesting thing because like, you know, you watch two people go through the exact same thing and one person's like, I didn't even notice it. Another person was talking about how debilitating it is. So it's really fascinating. And that idea of fear just kind of like has always kind of been present when I see people that are really in a lot of pain. I always wonder like, what's the fear aspect? Like, what are they afraid of?